First of all, welcome. I think this, by far, is our most international event that we've had. We counted something like people represented from 14 different countries. As I talked to some folks before, I think that's probably underrepresented. I noticed when I was looking at the little circles of flags, we not only have a number of nice European countries, I see that we've annexed both Japan and then repatriated the United States as part of Europe now. And by the way, who's from Japan here? I want to thank you guys for coming, and we talked about it yesterday. We're going to commit to having a community summit somewhere in the Asia-Pac area next year, so you're welcome to come to Europe, but we will come to you next time. So thank you for coming to visit us. I want to just talk a little bit about Europe and why it's particularly important to us. First of all, just the size of the DevOps community is really becoming remarkable. And if you take, first of all, there's meetups or DevOps meetups going on in every major city in Europe. If you take just 3 cities and look at the membership, it's almost 5,000 members in the DevOps groups between London, Amsterdam, in Berlin. And our own growth of our business, Europe represents our fastest growing market right now. And we have lots of graphs that we track and pay attention to metrics. That's just simply downloads. And there's something almost 6 million downloads a quarter of Chef going on in Europe. Hey, Aaron, how's things? It's an interesting market. Oh, also I wanted is folks from Criteo here in the room. Do we have? I think they're our largest group. Is there 14 folks from Criteo today? Big hand for those guys. I want to thank them. And to demonstrate how important the market is to us, we actually made a decision to do our mega launch, our November 3rd mega launch, what we're calling it, from actually this event that you're a part of here today in London. And as I think about what we're launching, I think there's probably an argument to be made that this might be our most significant launch since Chef itself was launched back in the day. And there's 3 things that we're going to talk about today in some depth. First of all, delivery. Second of all, compliance. And we actually bought a company. It's our second company that we've acquired, VolcanoSec. In fact, where's Dominic and Christoph? Yes, so big hand to those guys from VolcanoSec. So that now makes 50% of all the acquisitions in the history of Chef have taken place in Europe. And then thirdly, work that we've done around enterprise transformation. We're actually formalizing that and creating a practice. And interestingly, the head of that, Justin Arbuckle, happens to live in the UK. So a lot of things for us going on in Europe. Let me just talk about what we see happening in the marketplace right now. And you guys are living this every day, which is every industry, every company is in fact becoming a software company. And this is one of our neighbors in Seattle, Alaska Airlines. And I love this quote: "We're not just an airline, we're a software company." I would like to challenge this group. I would like to replace this quote with an even better and more pithy quote from one of our European customers. So please come up to me or Carolyn or someone here and help us put your logo up there. But this is actually the journey that's going on. And what we want to do as a company, our vision, is we want to help the most interesting, the most transformative, the most innovative companies. We want to be the platform to help you do that in software. And that's what we're thinking about. And I chose that word platform very carefully. We really don't think about Chef as a tool. We think about ourselves as a platform. And many of the things that we'll talk about for our announcement today really fit into that platform theme. And I think the journey that probably you're taking your respective organizations through is a very interesting one right now. And if I think about my own career and the transformation that IT has undergone, there's really a couple ways that you can think about that. And the first of all is just the sheer expansion in terms of numbers, right? When I started a while ago at Apple Computer in IT, we could measure the number of systems if you excluded desktops, certainly in the hundreds. I was actually trying to think about whether it was actually 100, and I think you could have a debate, but it was that quantity. And as we look at our big customers today, their systems, their servers, excluding desktops, are in the millions in some cases. So just being in IT, the scope of what you do and the complexity. Citi, who's one of our financial services customers, they were telling us that they have something like 3,500 legacy apps that they developed over 40 years. So you think millions of systems, thousands of apps, it's pretty complicated today being in IT. But I think the biggest expansion of IT isn't measured in infrastructure. In fact, I actually think that IT's in the business of getting out of the infrastructure business and really shifting their attention. And what IT is becoming is the innovation center of creating value for customers. And that's true if you're in financial services or insurance or retail or travel or probably any industry that's represented here, where you're now the primary touch point, or one of the primary touch points with customers is actually through software. And that's what we're moving from. We're moving from over here to over there. And it's messy. And this what we're calling the operating chasm, that is challenging and painful to get through. And I suspect that all of you are sort of living that every day. I think a really interesting industry right now is the automobile industry. And first of all, in that expansion of nodes, the car is now a node, right? So if you're the CIO, the number of devices that you manage is just exploding. But as we move to a world of self-driving cars, it's a great example of this IT being the primary innovation engine inside the company. And not only are we going to have this new era in the not so distant future where we can work on our email on the way of our commute, but there's also a real implication in the number of lives. In the U.S., something like 2,500 traffic deaths happen a month. And there's the opportunity, some people are predicting, to reduce that as much as 90% with self-driving cars through software. So if you think about, again, the value that we're all creating in our respective industries, it's a very exciting time. For those of us that have been in the software business for a while, what I think this thing that we call new IT is all about is how do we shift this curve? Because traditionally, you've had to make a trade-off between rate of innovation and quality, right? And if you were a startup, you'd say, hey, let's ship very quickly and we'll suffer quality. And if you were, financial services or a pharma, you'd say we want quality and we're going to slow things down. But this pattern emerged, and it really started with the web innovators, and then it sort of has pulled itself into the enterprise. And this pattern has let people simultaneously increase both rate of innovation and quality, and then they pick up a couple extra benefits. Turns out security was something that I don't think anyone really ever thought about early on as DevOps. It wasn't really the founding principle, but there are these other things you pick up. And it turns out, I think I hear from customers often, that you probably save money doing this. So that's why this pattern, I think, has taken root so strongly. And the pattern's cloud, automate everything, and then DevOps, which I'll talk about. And when I spoke at events like this maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, this was predominantly a practitioner movement, right? You were almost in opposition of management oftentimes. And I think one of the big shifts over the past couple of years is management now has gotten with the program. And I think the reason is simply this. It's hard to argue if you can shift this curve that you all have been doing. You're not going to have a very long career if you try to fight that. So. That's what's behind new IT. And then if you double click on DevOps, there's a lot of different ways that you can talk about DevOps. The way that I think about it is it's the tooling or the platforms, the culture, and workflow. And workflow is a word that we're going to start talking about more and more often. And I'll touch more on this. But these three things, they interact with each other both in positive and negative ways, so they reinforce each other. So you can't just bring Chef in or Slack or whatever and think that's going to be a magic bullet. You got to do the work on the other things. And I think actually the most work is probably in that culture circle. And I know with our customers, a lot of times we spend more work in that circle than any of those others. And back to my automobile industry example, a lens that I'd ask you to sort of look through and compare is, in our industry, the app is the crash test dummy, right? And like the auto industry, imagine if they because they used to do this, by the way, if you went back to the 50s, right? Their testing actually happened out in the wild, right, in production. And that's where they sort of learned about accidents and safety and all of that. And at a lot of companies, that's kind of what's going on with ITs. Like that's actually where we're learning about things is out in production. And I think there's an opportunity for us to step this stuff all the way back into build. And one of the topics that we're going to talk about is compliance and defining compliance as code and shifting that back to build. But I asked you to sort of think about that analogy. And as you know, at Chef, for a long time we've talked about infrastructure as code. And I want to talk about compliance for a second on this. So, the challenge. How many people, by the way, are under some sort of compliance or regulatory pressure, whether it's compliant to your own standards or true regulatory standards in the room? Show of hands. So, half. I think the real challenge with compliance right now is oftentimes it comes in the form of a binder. And if you give a binder to a developer, you don't know really what to do with that binder. And the reason the VolcanoSec folks were so interesting to us is they had been working not just inside a large enterprise organization, but actually working with government agencies to define compliance as code. And if you get that right, then you can actually take that code, you can move it into build, and in the same way that you do a functional check or a unit test, you can just make it a very low drama thing. So I think we'll come back to this meeting like this in maybe 3 or 4 years, and all this energy that's around compliance and friction between the compliance team, the security team, and developers, I predict that will just sort of dissipate over the next 3 or 4 years. And there'll be a lot of changes in this industry. And one of them is that compliance won't be defined as binders that are difficult to interpret how they apply to you, but they'll be defined as code and as a software check. And we'll talk about that more today. There's 3 things, as I touched on, that we're announcing today. And for all of these, and I think it's really relevant to the Community Summit, there's very significant portions that are in open source. And I just really wanted to just comment that first and foremost, we view ourselves as an open source company. We want to be a very authentic open source company. And while we're certainly a business and making money is part of what we think about, that happens when we have great community and when we do interesting things around open source. So I just wanted to sort of double down on our commitment around open source, and you will see us continue to release not only additions to things we've already done, but actually new projects and new components over time, and we'll talk about some of those today. And I talked about, I touched on workflow, and Chef historically has had both strengths and weaknesses, and one of those that is both a strength and weakness for us is the flexibility that Chef affords. And so what is great is you could throw sort of almost any problem at us, and Chef is like a box of Legos, and you could just go tackle it and approach it, and whatever you want to automate, there's a pretty good chance that we could figure out how to do it with Chef. The challenge is that we've learned over the years there's a set of patterns around workflow that lead to better outcomes than other patterns. And what we've wanted to do is, while retaining the things that are great about Chef and that flexibility, we want to start to describe some of those best practices of workflow in the product. And so that's really what delivery, I think the headline is about. And as you look at the Chef platform, for us, and this is an expansion of the platform, we now want to start with compliance. And what that is about, even if you're not under regulatory compliance, what that's really about is how can I assess what my environment is before I write any cookbooks or content. I want to just figure out what's out there, and then the Chef developer kit. That's all about how to, if I want to make a change or remediate at a local from a local dev environment, or promote it into Chef delivery, which allows me to then have a collaborative dev environment, including things like test, et cetera. Chef server, I suspect everyone's familiar with. Then you can actually make the change and publish the remediation. And then analytics to us is all about then verifying and understanding what has actually happened out there. So if some of these pieces are new to you, one of my invitations is don't leave the next 2 days without having a firm understanding of not just Chef Server, but really what we talk about is all of Chef. And we have, by the way, our team, I think we have around, Nathan, 30 people here? That's right. Yeah, so we got a big group and a big audience of Chef folks, and don't leave with questions unanswered. Maybe the last thing I'll just touch on is culture. And I think something that I'm particularly proud of and I think defines us as a company even more than our products is actually our own culture. And we have something that we use internally called the Recipe for Success. And I won't run you through the whole thing, but I will share just the very first element of the Recipe of Success is something that we call Fuel the Love of Chef. And by the way, we actually give employee awards out to some of which are in the room here. We have some Fuel the Love of Chef award recipients. And it's for people that have worked either with our community or customers and gone really the extra mile to help you all be successful. But I actually would say that you folks, first and foremost, help us fuel the love out there in your companies, out there in the community, and really just want to thank you and appreciate everything that you've done for us. So I appreciate it and thank you. And for the next 2 days, if you haven't been to an open space meeting, they're fun, they're kind of a little wild and a little woolly. And I think the recipe for success of these things is really 3 things. First of all, put yourself out there, connect. Nathan talked about the ambassador program, so hunt people down that have those red dots, engage, get the conversations going. And then I think the quality of the next 2 days really comes down to how much you guys all share with each other and contribute with each other, and not just in the open source sense, but in the what's going on and how we can help. And I think one of the hallmarks of our community more than any other community is the generosity around those last 2 things, that people really do share and they really do contribute with each other. So again, thank you. Appreciate all that you've done for us, and look forward to a good couple days.